Good evening, I'm David Kramer with Alaska Weather. As always, please visit our website, weather.gov/Alaska. You can update to the forecast or check out any watches, warnings, or advisories that we might have out for your area. Also call our weather info line, 1-800-472-0391, get updates to the forecast. Or check out or email me at the address at the bottom of the screen, david.kramer@noaa.gov. Taking a look now at the warnings and advisories that we have out for the state, we'll start up in the Beaufort Sea area, where in the central and eastern Beaufort Sea areas, we do have winter weather advisories that are out for blowing snow conditions, and those are going to be out until midnight tonight. We're going to see wind gusts up to as high as 45 miles per hour that could drop visibilities down to a half mile or less at times with that blowing snow. Down in the Kotzebue Sound area as well as the Chukchi Sea Coast area, we also have some winter weather advisories out for blowing snow. There we're going to see winds gusting up to as high as 35 miles per hour, and these are going to be in effect until 9 p.m. this evening. So the blowing snow could drop visibilities there down to a half mile or less at times as well. Down in the southeastern portions of the interior, we have several different advisories and warnings out. These are all going to primarily be for snow. The winter weather advisories are for snow, and then we have the two winter storm warnings. The one for Deltana and Tanana Flats area will be for snow, and then in the eastern Alaska Range will be snow, as well as some areas with the potential for some blowing snow. In the advisory areas, we're primarily looking at amounts between 1 to 3 inches with some localized amounts that could get up to as high as 6 to 9 inches. In the warning areas, we're primarily looking at snow to be between 3 and 6 inches. However, there could be localized amounts at around 11 inches for Deltana and Tanana Flats, but up to as high as 16 inches for those localized amounts in the eastern portions of the Alaska Range. These products are going to be out until 9 a.m. on Thursday for all of these ones in southeast interior. Finally, we have a winter storm watch out for the Kuskokwim Delta area. This is going to be in effect from Thursday evening through Friday morning, and there's the potential for blizzard conditions to occur, especially along the coast. We could see snow amounts between 2 to 4 inches, as well as winds gusting up to as high as 40 miles per hour, and we could see the potential for whiteout conditions if the blizzard conditions do occur. Looking ahead a little bit further into Friday night through Sunday over the interior, we are going to see another round of snow coming in that's going to have snow amounts up to as high as 12 inches for the areas that are north and west of Fairbanks. A little bit lower amounts in the Fairbanks area. They're going to be up to around 8 inches there. Again, this is going to be from Friday night through Sunday. Watch out if you're trying to travel around these areas. Could be a little bit more difficult with that heavy snow coming back in again Friday night through Sunday. Taking a look at our satellite imagery, we can watch our newest system coming in from the west towards the Shimei area. This is the one that will lead to the potential for blizzard conditions along the west coast. Again, we can watch the cloud cover moving in over the western Aleutian Islands, some of that making it out over the central Aleutians as well. As we look out over mainland Alaska, we can see some of the cloud cover where we do have that lingering snow over much of the interior, some up along the Arctic coastline as well. And then finally, we'll watch a low out over the Gulf of Alaska with a front pushing in over the Panhandle area, bringing a mixture of precipitation to the area with primarily snow up farther to the north. As we look at the weather for the remainder of the day, as I mentioned, we are going to see primarily snow up towards the Lynn Canal area and White Pass by the Panhandle area, but as we get farther to the south, a little bit warmer, we will see a mixture of rain and snow. Behind that system, we are going to have cold air coming in. We do expect it to be mostly snow as we get by the western portions of the Gulf of Alaska. We're going to have snow extending up through much of south central into the interior and up along the Arctic coastline. We do have those areas of blowing snow for the central and eastern portions of the Beaufort Sea, as well as down around the Kotzebue Sound area along the west coast. Dropping down into the Bering Sea, we have a weak low that's starting to diminish that's near the Alaska Peninsula, bringing a mix of rain and snow to the eastern Aleutian Islands, as well as snow for much of the Alaska Peninsula. For the central and western Aleutian Islands, however, a little bit warmer out there, we are expecting to see rain. As we move into tonight, still more rain for those areas out by the central and western Aleutians. However, colder as we move farther to the east, mix of rain and snow for the eastern Aleutians, and then snow for the Alaska Peninsula and the Pribilof Islands. We are also starting to see the leading edge of the front come in out over the western Bering from that next system that's going to be moving through primarily on Thursday. Over mainland Alaska, we have high pressure dipping down along the west coast of the state, keeping those areas fairly dry for tonight. And then in the central and eastern portions of the mainland, we are going to see more snow up along the Arctic coastline, with still continued areas of blowing snow for the eastern portions of the Arctic coast. Snow extending down into the south central area, and then with our low out over the Gulf of Alaska, we are going to expect more moisture coming in for the Panhandle area, and overnight tonight it'll transition back to being primarily snow. As we move into Thursday, warmer air is going to come back into the southern portions of the Panhandle, giving a mix of rain and snow. It could be potentially mostly rain as we move later into Thursday for those southern locations. Out over mainland Alaska, some lingering snow showers over south central Alaska, and then some more snow up in the interior through the Brooks Range and along much of the Arctic coast. High pressure still lingering out over the west coast of the state, keeping most of those areas fairly dry. Our front coming in from the west is now going to be moving through the central Bering Sea, bringing snow to the Pribilof Islands and a mix of rain and snow to the eastern Aleutians. Behind that warm front, we do have some warmer air where we are going to see some rain for the central and western Aleutians. As we move into Friday, that system will push in over the west coast, where we will see those blowing snow conditions along much of the southwest coastline. And we will see that snow starting to extend in through the Bristol Bay area and up through much of the interior, as well as much of the west coast and towards the Brooks Range. North of that, we are going to see some drier conditions along the Arctic coastline, and south central will be largely protected for much of Friday. Down in the Panhandle area, central locations looking to see snow, southern locations should see a mix of rain and snow. And then finally, way out by the western Aleutian Islands, we are going to see a transition from rain to snow as we move from east to west. Looking at our temperatures, low temperatures for Thursday morning. Starting off in the Panhandle area, we are going to see temperatures drop to just about freezing for southern locations and in the upper 20s for northern locations. 20 degrees along much of the North Gulf Coast near the Kenai Peninsula area, and the teens as we get a little bit further inland. 26 degrees for Valdez. Up in the interior, in those southeastern locations, we'll have more cloud cover and snowfall. We will stay a little bit warmer in the single digits to low teens. But as we move farther to the west and north, we're going to drop below zero, and we're going to see negative teens along much of the Arctic coastline. Near minus 10 along the west coast through the Seward Peninsula area. Then down in southwest Alaska, interior locations will drop below zero, but near the coastline will be in the lower single digits. For the Alaska Peninsula, down into the 20s, and then mid to upper 30s for the Aleutian Islands. Thursday afternoon highs starting off in the Panhandle area up till near 40 for the southern locations of the Panhandle, mid-30s as we get farther to the north. Near 30 degrees along much of the Prince William Sound area, as well as down in the Kenai Peninsula, and that's going to extend in the Cook Inlet area as well. Up in the interior, going to get up into the teens for southeastern locations, near 10 degrees as we get closer towards Galena, single digits as we get up by Ambler and Bettles, and then along the Arctic coastline, staying below zero, single digits. Down the west coast of the state, near zero for the Kotzebue Sound area. Norton Sound area, single digits. And then down in the southwestern portions of the state, we're going to get up into the teens near the YK Delta, and then near 20 degrees for the Bristol Bay area. Just above freezing for the Alaska Peninsula, and then in the lower 40s for much of the Aleutian Islands, 38 degrees for St. Paul. So you look at Friday morning low temperatures in the Panhandle area. Southern locations are going to drop to near or just below freezing, and then down into the lower 20s as we get farther to the north. Yakutat down to 22 degrees. For Kenai Peninsula on the eastern side, dropping down into the teens, but single digits as we get closer towards Cook Inlet, and 0 degrees for Gulkana. Up in the interior portions of the state, locations are going to drop below zero, primarily in the negative teens, negative single digits, however, for the far eastern locations. Along the Arctic coastline, a little bit colder as we get farther to the west, minus 21 degrees as we move west of Utqiagvik, but staying in the minus teens as we get farther to the east. Kotzebue Sound area near minus 10, and then near zero for the Norton Sound. Down in southwest Alaska, single digits away from the coastline, but as we get near the water, we're going to look at temperatures dropping into the teens, and then 20s for the Alaska Peninsula and mid-30s for the Aleutian Islands. Friday afternoon highs for the Panhandle, 40 degrees in southern locations, mid-30s as we get farther to the north. Near freezing for eastern portions of Kenai, and then in the 20s for much of the rest of south central Alaska. Up into the interior teens at southern locations, then we get progressively colder as we move farther to the north, getting below zero along the Arctic coastline. Single digits for the Kotzebue Sound area and the 20s for the Norton Sound area. Southwest Alaska will be just above freezing, and in the 40s for the Aleutian Islands.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
For aviation, we'll start off with a look at our flying weather on Thursday morning. Out over the Bering Sea and Aleutian Islands, we can see the front pushing through the central Bering Sea, bringing some IFR conditions to the area. Out ahead of this system, we're looking at VFR conditions for much of the Alaska Peninsula, as well as much of the west coast of the state. As we get into interior portions of the state, we will see some MVFR conditions and then some isolated areas of IFR up along the North Slope. Down the Gulf of Alaska, primarily MVFR, but holding at VFR for much of the Panhandle. As we move into Thursday afternoon, going to continue to see MVFR conditions out over the Gulf of Alaska, extending into the Yakutat area, but much of the Panhandle will remain VFR, as well as much of south central Alaska. However, MVFR conditions now extending into southwest Alaska, much of the interior and through the central Brooks Range and Arctic coast. Out over the Bering Sea and Aleutians, our front is pushed through the Pribilof Islands as well as the eastern Aleutians, bringing IFR conditions to those areas, as well as out by the western Aleutians. As we look into Friday morning, that system pushing into the west coast, we will see IFR conditions extending in to the YK Delta area as well as the Seward Peninsula and down south into the Alaska Peninsula. The rest of the Aleutians will be primarily MVFR until we get out by the western Aleutian Islands, where we will see some IFR conditions. Southern mainland Alaska will be primarily VFR, but we'll start to see some MVFR in the northern interior, Brooks Range, and Arctic coast with some isolated IFR as well. Down in the Panhandle area, we are starting to see some MVFR conditions creep in from the Gulf of Alaska, and also some IFR conditions in the furthest southern locations of the Panhandle. Friday afternoon, we are going to clear up in the Panhandle, expecting to see widespread VFR conditions with some isolated areas of MVFR out over the Gulf of Alaska. West coast of the state is starting to see more IFR conditions creep in, extending throughout much of southwest Alaska, the Seward Peninsula area, and even the western interior. We'll have MVFR conditions extending into much of the rest of the interior as well, primarily VFR conditions up along the Arctic coast as well as south central Alaska. Out over the Bering Sea, we're going to see a lot of IFR conditions extending from the western Aleutian Islands through the central Bering and down towards the Bristol Bay area. As we look at our passes, starting up north at Anaktuvuk Pass, we will have IFR conditions improving to MVFR conditions in the afternoon. Adigan Pass will also start off IFR, improve to marginal conditions in the afternoon. Lake Clark will start off as VFR conditions and then drop down to MVFR Thursday afternoon. Should be MVFR at Rainy all day on Thursday, as well as at Windy Pass. Isabel Pass will start off marginal and then improve to VFR conditions in the afternoon. Mentasta Pass should be MVFR throughout the day Thursday, and Tanita Pass will start off MVFR and then improve to VFR conditions later in the day. Portage will also start off MVFR and then improve to VFR conditions, and Chilkoot and White should both be VFR all day on Thursday. For our freezing level, we can see the surface freezing line through the Panhandle area, riding along the North Gulf Coast through Kodiak Island, then out through the Pribilof Islands and up into the northern portions of the Bering Sea. A lot of warmer air coming up near the Aleutian Islands. We will have freezing levels above 8,000 feet through the central Aleutians, extending out into the western Bering, and just south of the islands we will see freezing levels up to as high as 10,000 feet. As we look at our areas of icing in the northern Bering Sea, we will see below 10,000 feet, and then out over the Panhandle area above 1,000 feet is expected. For our jet stream, strongest portion of the jet out over the mainland part of the state is going to be over southwest Alaska, riding up much of the west coast out of a northwesterly direction as high as 145 knots, extending down just west of Kodiak Island. We'll also see branch of the jet up to as high as 150 knots, but that is going to be west of the western Aleutians, where the islands themselves will see a southerly component around 90 knots. Down to 9,000 feet, strongest winds are going to be out over the far western Bering Sea, but as we get closer towards the western Aleutians, it's going to be closer towards 60 knots out of a southerly direction. Then we're going to start to switch our direction out over the Bering to become more westerly, around 50 knots in the central Bering, and as we get by the Alaska Peninsula, northwesterly winds 55 knots are possible, and we're going to have that northwest component diminishing to 40 knots over southwest Alaska and 30 knots by the Seward Peninsula. We'll also have some southerly winds over the Panhandle around 30 knots. Down to 3,000 feet, Strongest winds will continue to be over the far western Bering as we get by the western Aleutians, however, that is going to be closer towards 50 to 55 knots out of a southerly direction. Going westerly over the central Bering, 35 knots, as well as the central Aleutians, and then northwesterly for the Alaska Peninsula, with some areas in the gaps getting up to as high as 55 knots, nearest to the south end of Kodiak. So you get up towards Kotzebue Sound area, northwest winds 20 knots, and 20 knots out of a south direction by the southern panhandle. For our turbulence, all along the Aleutian Islands and west coast, below 3,000 feet, below 5,000 feet by Kodiak, and below 6,000 feet for the southern panhandle is expected.
Welcome to another edition of Alaska Weather Facts. I'm meteorologist Dave Snyder with the National Weather Service, and joining us today, two more people to talk about the augmented reality sandbox. It's Alana Valaji. She's a University of Alaska Fairbanks mechanical engineering student, helped design and work on the details to make this new type of sandbox there. Thanks for joining us, Alana. Thanks. And Courtney Breest, she's the outreach coordinator for AKwx, which is the experimental program to stimulate competitive research. It's a program funded nationally by the National Science Foundation, right?
Yes.
Okay. Alana, tell us about how you changed and adapted this version of the augmented reality sandbox. It's a really cool tool.
So Gina approached us with 3 goals for this new version of the sandbox. They wanted it to be compact in a light system that could travel around the state. They wanted it to be child-oriented, so we designed the sandbox to have 3 different levels.
Okay.
It's pretty cool. You can have younger children, you can have high school kids. I guess I should say high school teenagers.
Sure.
And then we also designed it to be more marketable, user-friendly, so that this could be seen eventually in classrooms all over the place, all over the state.
Okay. And you had a big hand in this, but this was a team approach, right?
Definitely. It was a really good experience for myself, for George Stevens, who we'll see later.
One of our hand models today. Yeah.
For 2 other members who aren't here today, Cody Klingman and Austin Hunt. And it was just a really good learning experience all around.
Very good. And this is something that is part of your learning experience as well, so you get to check a box in your education.
Yeah,
right?
it's a requirement for seniors of mechanical engineering at University of Alaska Fairbanks.
Very good. Very good. Well, it is a wonderfully inquisitive tool, fun to play with, and I hope to get my hands in the sand here in just a little bit. But it's also part of a bigger program, something that we were talking about a moment ago, AKwx, and that's what Courtney is here to tell us more about. What is AKwx and why do you need a sandbox?
Well, AKwx, as you mentioned, is a national program. We're funded nationally, but we're actually located statewide. We're at UAF, we're at UAA, we're in Southeast at UAS. And she mentioned, you know, taking the sandbox as an educational tool, and that's where I'm an outreach coordinator for the South Central test case.
Okay.
Our focus is on the Kenai watershed, and we are really interested in using these tools like the sandbox to interact with the students down there and get them interested in STEM and also communicate the research findings that we've been having throughout the state.
Okay. And one of those, as George and Eric are kind of changing the contours for us there from UAF to maybe something that resembles a little bit of something more of the Kenai watershed, which is one of your focuses for the study, right? And specifically looking at some of the changes there and how that impacts people and also the salmon.
Yes, it is all of our research is social and environmental.
Okay.
So we have social scientists working hand in hand with our environmental scientists. One of the things we're studying is Upper Russian Lake, and we have a researcher taking sediment cores from that lake. So one of the things we're going to use the sandbox to communicate is how the landscape changed over a long period of time, thousands of years, going from glacier, covered by glacier ice, to being filled with water. And then
that's what they're doing right now.
Exactly. So
live.
So they're moving
cool.
the water around. And then I think they've got some props over there, because we're also going to go a little bit more in depth and explain how the salmon got there.
Okay.
So using
there's
these,
the salmon.
Exactly. Oh, I think there's a few more.
Yeah, we like more salmon in Alaska. More salmon.
Yeah, exactly. So it's really taking the findings from our research grant and just trying to connect with the community and translate it in a really hands-on and exciting way, so people can, you know, interact with us as much as possible.
Well, sure. That makes the learning and the science real and quite literally in your face, rather than just some boring black and white paper that you have to read about. This is something that people can understand better because it's visual and they're touching and feeling and seeing these changes, right?
Yeah, and get them engaged. And then outreach is a huge component, and working with the younger students, and actually even, I mean, working with the UAF graduate and engineering students it's a huge part of our grant, and we really enjoy it.
Oh, it is wonderfully exciting. And so, Alana, you were telling us that this is built to travel.
Right.
And this is built to do more things than version 1. Where can this type of project go in Alaska? And what can it demonstrate?
I mean, we were hoping to eventually get to villages that were harder to reach, that you couldn't necessarily move a whole fixed instrument to, right? You need something that can pack up, fit in your truck bed. I mean, one of the most attractive parts of this project is that this was going to be something that was used past our graduation point. You know, this is going to be something that lives in the state for years.
Right, right. Well, it looks like you're well on your way with that. So what are, give me another example. What else can this show us? We've talked about the Kenai River watershed. What's the coolest thing that you've played in the sand with? What's your idea?
Well, I definitely enjoy the props, but we also like kind of building up a giant mound, and if you put some water behind it, you can make a little runway, I guess, and you know, demonstrate the effects of the hydrology by just putting up a dam and letting it all pour right down. And so that could, I think you mentioned it earlier, you could even demonstrate the effects of a tsunami.
Right.
Or something along those lines.
So it's not just topography, but it's also hydrology and coastal surge mapping and some of the coastal changes that we're seeing here in Alaska, and seeing what the smaller changes in the sandbox might do to kind of a real effect of a slosh or a push of water up on the coast. Tsunami inundation mapping, or even glacial dam release, as some has been demonstrated before. So wow, that's just an impressive thing. That it seems like the possibilities are nearly endless with this, and probably even more ideas that are popping up in your head too.
Yeah, as we speak.
Very cool. All right. Well, if folks want to get more information about EPSCoR, you guys are online. You're on Facebook, Twitter, and on YouTube. AKEPSCOR, right? EPSCoR, Alaska EPSCoR, that is. And again, you guys are funded by the National Science Foundation, so more to come from that, and a longer-term study there. Thank you, ladies, for joining us today. Congratulations on your hard work there. This is really fun. And for now, I'm meteorologist Dave Snyder with this edition of Alaska Weather Facts, and I'm going to go play in the sandbox there. We'll see you next time.
And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Welcome back for the marine section of the forecast. We'll start off with a look at the sea ice edge. We do have the sea ice stretching down from the northern Bering Sea down through the Bristol Bay area. In the far western locations in the western Bering especially, we are seeing some southward movement of the ice edge. This is primarily strips of ice breaking off from the main ice pack. However, as we get to the more central and eastern locations, we are seeing some of the ice edge retreating. Taking a look now down in southeast Alaska for Thursday, in the inside waters, southerly winds 15 to 20 knots are expected. Eastern portions of the Gulf of Alaska, south to southwest winds 20 knots, and as we move farther to the north, diminishing down to 10 knots and becoming more easterly. For Friday in the inside waters, central and northern locations, northwest winds 10 knots, and then southern locations, southeast 15. Out over the Gulf waters, east to northeast winds 10 to 15 knots in eastern locations, then becoming westerly as we get farther to the north, 10 to 15 knots. As we look in south central for Thursday, northern portions of the Gulf of Alaska, northeast winds 10 to 20 knots, getting stronger as we move farther to the west. 30 to 40 knots as we get closer towards the Kenai Peninsula, becoming more north to northwesterly. And then storm force winds 15 knots out of a northwesterly direction out of Kamishak Bay. In Cook Inlet area, northerly winds 10 to 15 knots, stronger as we get farther to the south, and in Prince William Sound, northwest winds 25 knots. For Friday, Prince William Sound, northwest winds 20 knots, northern portions of the Gulf of Alaska, westerly winds 15 knots, and then northwest winds 25 to 30 knots south of Kenai Peninsula. West of the Barren Islands, northwest winds 30 knots, and then in the Cook Inlet area, northerly winds 10 knots expected. For Thursday for the Alaska Peninsula and Kodiak Island, starting around Kodiak Island, northwest winds 40 knots expected, seas up to as high as 11 feet east of the island. South of Kodiak Island, northwest winds 45 knots expected, and then closer towards Sand Point, we're going to drop down to 30 knots out of a northerly direction. Out over on the Bering side, northerly winds 25 knots are expected. On Friday, all directions becoming more westerly. We're going to see 25 to 30 knots on the Bering side, 25 to 30 knots as well on the Pacific side, and then 25 knots around Kodiak Island. Shelikof Strait will have a little bit more of a southwesterly direction. For the Aleutian Islands on Thursday, out by the eastern Aleutians, north to northwest winds 22 to 25 knots, westerly winds 25 knots for the central Aleutians, and then getting stronger as we approach the western Aleutians, up to as high as 40 knots out of the southwest, with seas up to as high as 12 feet, highest west of Attu. On Friday, out by the eastern Aleutian Islands, westerly winds 25 to 30 knots, becoming southerly 25 for the central Aleutians, and then out by the western Aleutian Islands, southerly winds as well, around 30 knots, with seas up to as high as 13 feet. Along the west coast of the states, starting up north, we're going to see northwesterly winds in Norton Sound 15 knots, as well as by St. Lawrence Island. North of Nunavik Island, southerly winds 15 knots. However, on the south side, it's going to be northerly winds 25 knots. By St. Matthew Island, southerly winds 25 knots, and by the Pribilof Islands, south winds 15. As we move into Friday, most locations are going to see southwesterly winds, 30 knots by the Pribilof Islands as well as St. Matthew Island, 25 knots south of Nunavik Island, 30 knots north, and 30 knots by St. Lawrence Island. A little bit different in Norton Sound area, we're going to see southeast winds 25 knots. The highest seas will be south and west of St. Matthew Island, up to as high as 16 feet. For the Arctic coastline, we're going to see easterly winds 20 knots, dropping down as we get closer towards the Chukchi Sea area, down to as low as 10 knots there of a northerly direction, and the northwest winds around the Bering Strait area, 15 to 20 knots, strongest closer towards Kotzebue Sound. On Friday, along the Arctic coastline, variable winds around 5 knots, picking up as we drop down the west coast of the state, becoming more easterly, 15 to 25 knots, strongest again as we get closer towards the Kotzebue Sound area, and then switching and becoming southwesterly, south of the strait, up to as high as 30 knots. For a recap of tonight's weather, we do have a new system coming in from the west. We do expect this one to bring the potential for blizzard conditions to the Kuskokwim Delta coastline as we move into Thursday. However, for tonight, that system will be pushing through the western Bering Sea. We'll see some snow out by the Pribilof Islands, as well as some rain by the central Aleutians. Becoming colder as we move to the east, we're going to see snow over the Alaska Peninsula. Mainland Alaska, west coast is going to have high pressure that's going to keep things primarily fairly dry, but as we move into the interior, central and eastern locations are going to have snow that's going to extend up to the Brooks Range and along the Arctic coastline. We'll also have blowing snow conditions for the central and eastern portions of the Beaufort Sea. Down in south central Alaska, we'll see some lingering snow showers, and then some more snow for the Panhandle area, with the southern locations still hanging on to a mix of rain and snow. For Thursday, we'll see a continued mix of rain and snow in southern locations of the Panhandle, with snow over central and western portions of mainland, and our system in the Bering Sea continuing to push farther to the east, bringing snow to the Pribilof Islands. For Alaska Weather, I'm David Kramer.
These forecasts are for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating.